I highly doubt that many of the people that woke up in Dundas, Ontario, a town now part of Hamilton, or strolling along Dundas Street in Toronto, or farming the land in Dundas County out in eastern Ontario between Ottawa and Cornwall, could actually tell you who Henry Dundas was. Now, if you don't know, this is a man who never visited Canada but has so much name for him. And he's about to get plenty of play in the news. It all relates to the Black Lives Matter's anti-racism protests going on around the world. They want his name removed. Henry Dundas was a Scottish politician. He was also a friend of John Graves Simcoe, the first Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, now Ontario. So Graves is actually known for overseeing the abolition of slavery in what became Ontario, but Dundas, well, he helped prolong the dreadful institution of slavery by opposing abolition efforts by people like William Wilberforce in the British Parliament. Now, for that reason, we've got a small, but surely a growing number of people saying that things like Dundas Street in Toronto have to be renamed. The name has to be taken down and could be the town of Dundas. Maybe that'll happen next, or maybe the county, because of his racist views. My initial reaction to such an idea is to bristle that we would just erase our history rather than learn from it. Now, I'll grant you, I'd rather see more places named for the likes of William Wilberforce than for Henry Dundas. Sadly, that just isn't the case. Not in today's world. We can change that, but I'm not sure about getting rid of historical names. I'd also like to see more knowledge of our history, including the fact that history did exist in various parts of Canada far longer than many people would have you to believe. Most Canadians don't think we had history. And we should know more about people like Josiah Henson, the author, preacher, community builder, who was the inspiration behind Uncle Tom's Cabin, the novel by Harriet Beecher Stowe. That's what we should be doing, lifting up, not tearing down. Erasing history? I say no to that. We're better to confront our history and then learn from it. Now, that's what's actually happening in Edinburgh right now. Edinburgh is the Scottish capital. It's the place where Henry Dundas spent much of his time and much of his political capital, including extolling his support for continuing the slave trade. Now, there's a huge statue of Henry Dundas that dominates part of downtown Edinburgh. In a city filled with statues, his is one of the most prominent. Now, there's been a campaign for some time to change, not the statue, not to get rid of it, but to change what's at the bottom. Sir Geoff Palmer, Scotland's first black professor, has been at the forefront of this campaign. He simply wants a plaque at the base of the statue added to it explaining the role that Dundas had in opposing abolition. Now, that campaign has the support of one of Dundas's direct descendants who, well, feel that the full truth of what his ancestors stood for has to be known. That's how you handle the uncomfortable parts of your history. You own up to it. You acknowledge it. You learn from it. You grow and you move on. Now, let's be honest. Dundas had very little connection to Canada. And let's say that we got rid of his name completely. Well, would we be erasing Canadian history? Not much. We'd be erasing a name that we all know, but not much about Canadian history. But that leads to the question, who's next? What do we do about someone like Joseph Brant? Do we just get rid of Joseph Brant and everything that's named for him? Now, if you don't know the name Joseph Brant, he was a Mohawk leader. He was someone who helped his people fight during the American Revolution on the side of the British, and in reward, they established the Brant Tract. This is the massive reserve out by Caledonia. Brant brought his people after the American Revolution into Ontario. He's got the town of Brantford named for him. He's got a prominent hospital and a homestead named for him in Burlington. He's got streets named for him all over, and he was a slave owner. He brought black slaves with him when he moved his people north from New York State. He had white slaves, he had black slaves, he had native slaves. Do we get rid of him? What about former Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier? Now, Laurier wasn't a slave owner, but his government enacted many racist policies designed to make sure that only white settlers arrived in Canada. We only wanted white immigrants under Laurier. He increased the Chinese head tax to $500 back in 1903. That was a fortune at the time. He effectively blocked immigration from India through policies on how you could get to Canada. And at one point, he actually signed a cabinet order banning black immigrants from Canada. He declared that the Negro race was unsuitable to this country? Do we remove him from our money? Do we change the name of the hotel? Do we denounce him for his beliefs regardless of his other accomplishments? Or do we learn that these men, like all people, well, they're far from perfect? All of us are far from perfect. Look, society has changed greatly since open racism was the norm and what was expected, and that's a good thing. We've still got a long way to go, though. Hiding what happened in the past won't get us to the place that we need to be.